Arthur walks down Commercial Street, pulling his collar tight against the biting January wind. The North End is usually a cacophony of sounds. There is the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones, the shouting of sailors, and the constant, rhythmic hum of a neighborhood that never truly sleeps. But today, there is something else. It is a scent so thick you can almost feel it on your tongue. It is not the usual smell of the waterfront. It is not the salt spray of the Atlantic or the sharp tang of fish from the nearby markets. Instead, a heavy, cloying sweetness hangs in the cold air. It is the smell of fermentation, deep and dark, like fruit left too long in the sun. It clings to the wool of his coat and settles in the back of his throat. As he nears the waterfront, the source of the smell becomes impossible to ignore. The massive tank owned by the Purity Distilling Company looms overhead. It is a gargantuan thing of steel, a dark mountain of rivets and iron that seems to swallow the light. Even in the pale winter sun, the tank looks imposing, a silent giant watching over the docks. Arthur pauses for a moment, squinting up at the structure. The sweetness is overwhelming here, almost suffocating. He wonders if the shipment is particularly large this month, or if the air is simply trapping the scent against the ground. He shakes the thought away and continues his walk, but the smell follows him, a sugary ghost trailing in his wake. Arthur stops near the base of the tank to catch his breath, and that is when he hears it. It is not a steady sound, but a series of sharp, sudden noises. Pop, pop, pop. They sound like small gunshots echoing off the brick walls of the surrounding warehouses. He watches as a few workers in heavy canvas coats hurry around the base of the structure, their faces etched with a quiet, nervous energy. He realizes then that the tank is not as silent as it looks. The steel is groaning. It is a low, vibrating sound that he feels in the soles of his boots, more than he hears with his ears. The tank is 50 feet tall, a monstrous vessel holding 2 million liters of molasses. It is a weight that seems unnatural, a pressure that the iron was never meant to hold for long. He notices a dark, glistening trickle weeping from a seam near the bottom. It is a slow, steady leak, a dark ribbon of syrup that stains the pavement. The workers seem to be trying to patch it, but the liquid is relentless. Every few minutes, another rivet snaps, flying off into the slush with a metallic ping. The metal itself seems to be straining, bending under the immense, shifting weight of the dark liquid inside. Arthur watches a man wipe sweat from his forehead despite the freezing air. There is a tension in the way the men move, a sense that they are all waiting for a sound that they know is coming, but cannot quite name. The afternoon sun begins to break through the grey Boston clouds, warming the air just enough to lift it above freezing. To most, it feels like a reprieve, but Arthur watches the tank with a growing sense of unease. As the temperature rises, the dark, fermented molasses inside begins to react. The heat is working on the liquid, causing the fermentation gases to build up, creating a silent, invisible pressure against the steel walls. The tank seems to be breathing. The groaning has become more frequent, a rhythmic, metallic protest against the expanding mass within. The sweetness in the air has turned from pleasant to sickly, a heavy fog of sugar that seems to thicken as the sun climbs. Arthur stands a few yards away, his eyes fixed on a particular section of the iron plating. He notices a slight bulge, a subtle bowing of the metal that was not there an hour ago. Then, the sound changes. The low groans are cut short by a sudden, sharp crack. It is a sound like a heavy branch breaking in a storm, loud and final. It vibrates through the ground, a violent shudder that rattles the windows of the nearby buildings. The workers freeze, their eyes wide, looking up at the towering wall of iron. The pressure has reached a breaking point. The silence that follows the crack is the most terrifying thing Arthur has ever heard, a heavy, expectant stillness that precedes the end of everything. The silence does not last. The crack in the iron is followed by a roar so loud it feels like a physical weight against my chest. The steel plates do not just leak, they burst outward, tearing away from the rivets with a sound like 1,000 cannons firing at once. For a heartbeat, there is only the sight of the metal flying, and then the wave arrives. It is not water. It is a wall of dark, churning liquid, 25 feet high, moving with a terrifying, unstoppable momentum. I see the wave hit the elevated train tracks first. The iron supports shudder, and the heavy structure groans as the brown mass slams into it. The sheer force of the impact sends a spray of dark sludge high into the air, obscuring the sun. I try to run, but my boots find no purchase on the slick, vibrating cobblestones. The air is suddenly filled with the sound of grinding metal and the thunder of the approaching tide. The wave reaches me before I can find cover. It hits me with the force of a runaway locomotive. I am lifted off my feet and tossed through the air, a rag doll caught in a storm. I hit a brick wall with a dull thud that knocks the breath from my lungs. I slump to the ground, my vision swimming, as the world turns into a dark, suffocating blur. The sound of the wave is everywhere, a deep, heavy rushing that drowns out my own heartbeat. I can only lie there, gasping, as the shadow of the brown wall sweeps over the street, turning the familiar North End into a landscape of moving, liquid darkness. The world is heavy. When I finally manage to push myself up, the air is thick, and the light is dim, filtered through a haze of brown dust and steam. The street is gone. In its place is a sea of viscous, moving sludge that moves with the agonizing weight of wet concrete. The wave has not stopped. It continues to surge, a slow, relentless tide that crushes everything in its path. I hear the sickening sound of wood splintering. A few yards away, a row of wooden tenements is being hammered by the sludge. The buildings do not simply fall. They are ground into the earth, the heavy molasses filling every crack and crevice, pulling the structures down into the mire. Nearby, the Cloquety refinery is being torn apart, its machinery and walls yielding to the sheer mass of the liquid. I try to move, but every step is a battle. The molasses reaches my waist, and it pulls at me, a heavy, suctioning force that threatens to drag me under. It is not just thick, it is suffocating. Every breath I take feels like I am inhaling sugar and dust. I see a piece of debris, a broken door, float past me, moving with a slow, predatory grace. The noise is the worst part. It is not the roar of a flood, but a series of deep, wet thuds and the constant, rhythmic crunching of wood and brick being pulverized under the weight of the syrup. I am trapped in a nightmare of brown, where the very ground has turned into a hungry, suffocating trap. The chaos is absolute. Through the thick, cloying fog of the scent, I see figures moving, stumbling through the dark sludge. They are neighbors, men from the docks, and the first responders who have arrived from the nearby stations. They are shouting, but their voices sound strangely muffled, as if the heavy air is absorbing the sound. I see a local delivery wagon half submerged in the mire. The horses are thrashing, their eyes wide with terror, their legs churning fruitlessly against the thick liquid. They are sinking. the molasses pulling them down with every desperate movement. A man is shouting at them, trying to grab their harnesses, but he is struggling just to stay upright himself. People are trying to use ropes to reach those trapped in the ruins of the buildings, but the ropes are useless. They become coated in the heavy syrup almost instantly, growing stiff and heavy, losing their strength. We try to pull, but the sludge fights back, clinging to the ropes and the people with a lethal, sticky grip. I hear a cry for help from somewhere beneath a pile of debris, a high, thin sound that is quickly swallowed by the heavy, sweet scent of the air. It is a desperate, frantic struggle. We are not just fighting the wreckage, we are fighting the liquid itself, which seems to have a life of its own, pulling everything down into its dark, suffocating depths. The frantic shouting has died down, replaced by a silence that feels heavier than the syrup itself. As the sun begins to dip, the true scale of the ruin settles over the north end. The street is no longer a street, but a landscape of dark, jagged mounds. I walk slowly through what remains, my boots making a sucking, rhythmic sound with every step. The air is no longer just sweet, it is cloying, a thick scent that coats the back of my throat and stays there. We start to find them. The numbers are grim. One by one, the names of the missing are replaced by the grim reality of the dead. 21 souls are lost to the tide. I see a group of men standing near a collapsed storefront, their faces grey and hollow. They are not talking. They are just staring at the wreckage. My eyes catch a flash of colour in a pool of dark residue near a broken curb. I reach down, my hands trembling, and pull a small, wooden horse from the sludge. It is a child's toy, its painted eyes staring up at me, partially encased in a hardened shell of brown. That is when the terror of the cold sets in. The temperature is dropping, and the molasses is not behaving like water. It is thickening. It is turning into something closer to stone. The edges of the pools are hardening into a dark, glass-like crust, trapping debris and broken pieces of lives beneath a cooling lid. It is a graveyard that is sealing itself shut, preserving the horror in a sugary tomb that will take weeks to clear. The quiet of the aftermath is broken by the arrival of men in dark suits and heavy coats. They do not look like the neighbors, and they do not look like the rescuers. They are investigators, carrying clipboards and looking at the steel ruins of the tank with clinical eyes. I stand on the edge of the debris, watching them work. They move through the wreckage, poking at the iron plates and the twisted remnants of the rivets. The news begins to trickle out through the crowd, and it is uglier than the disaster itself. I hear a man near the corner whispering to a group of workers about what the investigators found. The tank was a lie. It was built poorly, with steel that was too thin, and it had been leaking for weeks. One investigator, a man with a sharp nose and a tired expression, was seen inspecting a section of the wall that had been patched with nothing more than a thin layer of paint. They had known it was failing, and they had done nothing. The anger in the north end is a physical thing. It is a low, vibrating heat that rises from the cobblestones. People are gathered on every corner, talking about the United States Industrial Alcohol Company. We are not just mourning anymore, we are hunting. The owners, men who live in fine houses far from the smell of the waterfront, are suddenly the most hated men in Boston. The community is no longer just a collection of grieving families. We are a wall of fury, and we are looking for someone to hold accountable for the sweetness that turned into death. The fight moves from the streets to the cold, marble halls of the courtroom. It takes months, even years, for the weight of the tragedy to be measured in legal terms. I sit in the back of the room during one of the hearings, watching the lawyers in their stiff collars. The families of the victims, the widows and the orphans of the North End, sit in the front rows, their presence a silent, heavy indictment of the men in the expensive suits. The defense is desperate. I listen to their lawyers argue, their voices smooth and practiced. They try to turn the disaster on its head. They claim this was not negligence, but sabotage. They suggest that an anarchist, someone looking to cause chaos in the city, must have planted a bomb to rupture the tank. They want us to believe the company is a victim of a crime, rather than the architect of a catastrophe. It is a lie, a transparent attempt to shift the blame from the thin steel to a ghost. But the evidence is too heavy to ignore. The investigators brought the truth in their briefcases, showing the court the records of the faulty construction and the warnings that were ignored. The tide of the trial turns, slowly but surely. When the ruling finally comes, it is a landmark. The court finds the company liable for gross negligence. They are forced to pay, but the money cannot bring back the 21, and it cannot wash the scent of molasses from the memories of the North End. The victory is hollow, a legal triumph that feels like a bandage on a gaping wound. I walk past the corner of Commercial Street and Atlantic Avenue, where the pavement is clean and the modern city hums with a different kind of energy. The massive steel tank is long gone. The site where the iron groaned and the brown wave tore through the neighborhood has been paved over, built upon, and forgotten by most of the world. But I am not most people. I am a man who remembers the weight of that air. Sometimes, when the sun beats down hard on the North End during the height of a humid July, something strange happens. The heat rises from the asphalt, and for a fleeting moment, the wind shifts. I stop walking. I close my eyes and breathe in. It is not the salty tang of the harbour or the smell of roasting coffee from the nearby shops. It is a thick, cloying, heavy sweetness. It is the scent of a ghost. The old-timers used to say the molasses soaked so deep into the very soil of the district that it would never truly leave. They say the earth itself holds the memory of that afternoon. I do not know if that is scientifically true, but I know how it feels. It feels like a warning. We talk about progress as if it is a straight line, a steady climb towards something better. But we forget that progress is often built on the bones of what we ignored. We forget the cost of a shortcut, or the price of a poorly welded seam. The North End moved on, as cities always do, but the sweetness remains. It lingers in the heat, a quiet reminder that the past is never as settled as the ground beneath our feet.